DragonCon, Crispy here, with a special presentation basically about how to be a moderator. And I'm here with some great voices of DragonCon. I'm going to introduce our panel here from my right, your left, on over. So introduce yourself and tell us what your first panel was.
I'm Phil Collins. I'm the director of board games. My first panel that I moderated for DragonCon was 3 years ago, Gil Gerard.
Nice.
Gil, fantastic. And you are?
My name is Tony Gowell. I'm the director of the DragonCon Convention Office. And my first panel was way back in 2009. Malcolm McDowell doing his solo panel on what it was like working on Clockwork Orange with the famous, amazing Stanley Kubrick.
That is quite a way to get started there.
Yes, it was definitely a way to just jump in and do it.
Fantastic. And the last member of our panel?
I'm Darin Bush. I'm a new moderator to DragonCon this year, but I've moderated panels at other conventions. And at this point, it is a blur. I'm not sure what my first moderated panel was. It had something to do with Cthulhu, though, I'm pretty sure.
Alters the mind. It makes sense. And I actually just recently started doing panels myself. My first panel was 2016 with Brett Dalton from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, very nice.
So there were supposed to be other people, I think, and it was just he and I on stage.
Aww.
And it was delightful. He made me as much a part of the panel as anything else, which was a great way to kind of get into panels. Because for me, being a first-time panelist, I wasn't sure what to do.
Sure.
The convention took a shot on me because I do these interviews and I do video packages, and they're like, Crispy, go do this panel. You know what to do. No instruction whatsoever.
And in the moment, you want to be like, yeah, absolutely, I'm on it.
I got it.
Do it. Oh, God. Oh, God.
Yeah, panic face.
So hopefully with this, we can get some other people to avoid having to have
Correct.
that type of situation where you get thrown in the deep end with literally no lifeline.
With no life, and that's exactly what we're here for. So we have a fancy document that we're not going to go over bullet point by bullet point because we're a video. If you want the document, it'll be online at the Devo database. Feel free to go through. But we will be hitting key points in this, as well as our own personal experiences, things that we've seen through the years that we've done panels, presentations, and things like that. Because regardless of where we do panels, they're all the same experience, even though they're unique experiences. You have the same type of people, the same type of questions, the same type of personalities on the table. So there's a lot of shared experience here among all the years of panels that we've been moderating.
Right. And it's all about having a conversation.
It is.
And that's primarily what you're there to do as a moderator. You're to facilitate a conversation.
Mm-hmm. You want to keep the flow going.
Absolutely.
You want to make sure people are engaged, because if we are looking at our audience and everyone's just on their phone, it's not great for anyone. And if you look over and your celebrity is also on the phone, well, maybe then they're blogging something. But you want to keep the attention, you want to keep the focus, and you want to keep them on topic. Like if they're there for a Star Trek panel, most guests are Star Trek specific. Most of the questions and conversation will be about Star Trek. So with that in mind, Tony, what is like one of your first big notes that you want to give new moderators?
Know who you're moderating for. It's really important that when you're assigned a panel, that you know exactly how many guests are to be expected on the panel, and that you do a little bit of research of who those guests might be, so that you're well versed in who they are and what their relationship is on the table.
That makes sense. From a personal point, for me, I did Starship Troopers last year,
Nice.
Which was fun. They were all great people, but I own up to the fact I didn't do any research. I was like, it's Starship Troopers. How in depth could it be? And I got owned, and I did that for 2 panels, and it was an experience. But I definitely would recommend, please do a little bit more research than I did. Be aware of the ties to the show, the history of the things like that. Be it a movie, a TV show, an author, whomever. Get a little history behind it, because if the audience doesn't have the questions provided, it's up to you to keep that panel going. You have an hour panel, say 50 minutes, give or take, and it is your job to keep that going.
And one of the things that you do by doing just a little bit of basic research is you get the guest engaged, because the guests or your other panelists, they may not be ready to get started, but you doing a little research will help you with something as simple as you might have a fact or a tidbit that the audience may not know. They know it, but they may not know they know it. You just want to get something to kick it off, because it's intimidating to ask that first question or get the panel started, and you're doing a little bit of research can make that easier for everybody.
Sure, I think that's completely fair.
The best scenario is to know the person and know the topic well enough that you can ask a couple of questions, get things started, so that you're not going to get caught off base. It is not great to have to rely on 3x5 cards, but in my opinion, a couple of 3x5 cards is better than not knowing what you're talking about.
True story.
I tend to do that. I tend, just in case, I mean, it hasn't happened yet with all the panels I've moderated, but I have 4 or 5 questions that I can ask, and at least 1 or 2 of them is kind of in depth for the panelists to answer, because you never know when someone's going to have a brain freeze.
Yeah.
And it's really bad when the entire room has a brain freeze, and you're just sitting there. So,
How you doing?
hi,
Yeah.
welcome to DragonCon. You know, all of us start with those, but you got to have something. You got to have something in the bag, and a couple of cards sitting on a table in front of you, written so that you can read them, can really bail you out.
So one thing I've done to that point, though, is I use a note app on my phone, so I wasn't wasting
exactly
cards.
what I use.
Every panel, like I would not sit there and have the phone up during the panel. Of course, you don't want to be rude to the guests, but I would have it over here off to the side, and I would just have the questions going. And as a moderator, your job is to listen. I'd be listening, finding ways. Maybe this question was asked. Maybe this story that's being told can lead into that question. Things like that. Keeping the flow, keeping it authentic. Try not to freak out and take breaks.
And you never know that question that you did a little research on. You never know if that's going to be the one that opens up the floodgates,
Right.
And get your panelists engaging the audience.
Break them out of the shell.
Exactly.
There was an experience I had with one of our previous guests who was on Heroes. And I was not a part of the interview. I was the cameraman for that particular interview, but I was whispering all the factoids into our interviewers' ears, like, these are the points that you want to hit. And this person was very reserved. They were really not so much uncomfortable, like, I don't really want to talk, clammed up, but they were obligated to. But then the interviewer asked that one question, and completely the person changed. It was a totally different person in that seat. And I've seen that happen, not necessarily in panels I've moderated, because I've only moderated a few, but in panels that many in this room have hosted before. It is a beautiful moment to see as well.
Well, and everybody, their panelists, they like to talk about themselves. I mean, they would not be in this business if they didn't like to talk, especially about themselves. And again, just something you found on Wikipedia.
Right. That's fair.
Fair. But also, especially for the actors, some of them are really, really good at looking like they know what they're saying because they're following a script. And every once in a while, you run into somebody who doesn't know how to really just be personable and to 3,000 people, doesn't know how to improvise, and you really do have to step up and go, all right, I'm going to be your guideposts. You fill in with the interesting stuff that they want to hear.
It's a different world for sure.
And DragonCon can be a little intimidating. We've had guests come to the show over the years that have never done fandom before, and this is their first time in the atrium ballroom, and they look out and there are 3,000 people there.
It's only 3,000 people.
And they're there, and it's kind of intimidating. Yeah. But again, these people are into self-promotion. They promote themselves well once you get them started.
You get that comfort.
But that's kind of the secret. You have to be prepared to get them started talking, because and usually once you get them started talking, you might have some difficulty.
That's when you really work.
Yeah.
That's when you really work as a moderator, is when they start talking and don't stop.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we've touched on all these great things about how important it is to know who you're moderating for, to get a familiarity of the guests and or panelists that are there with you, because sometimes there is the chance that it is their very first convention and they've never spoken to a large group of people. Sometimes, like you were saying, that they are actors and so they're used to being guided, and it's kind of our job is to be that guide for them. So that's the number one most important thing, is to know who you're moderating for.
On that same topic, knowing who you're moderating for is very important. You also got to know, when you're talking to one of these guests, what they might not want to talk about.
Yes.
That's very true.
That's actually going to bring me into my next point.
Okay, cool.
So we've talked about what to know going in when you do your research, but let's talk about what you do when you get to your panel. Before the panel starts, you show up to the space.
Sure.
You obviously want to introduce yourself to the people who are running the room. Be like, "Hi, I'm the moderator for this section. Let's go over, make sure all the microphones are working real quick and things like
Absolutely.
that. And make sure because if the audience can't hear you."
And it's not just the microphones on the stage you have to worry about, especially in some of the larger panel rooms. There may be a wireless Well, I think in every room there's a wireless mic. You want to make sure that's working.
Yeah.
And if the tech lead has something to tell you about, you have to wait a couple seconds before you speak into this wireless mic because of the way it's, the type of microphone they have. You need to know that because you don't want to have that wireless microphone out there and Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, yeah. What was that question again?
Exactly.
Yeah, it slows it down.
But also, in my experience working with the tech ops folks at all of these conventions, is going up to them and saying, can you help me learn how to use this piece of tech? They love that question. You can't do it 3 minutes before a panel. No. That doesn't work. But one of the big problems with the lavalier mics, the portable mics, is that there's no magic way to figure out how to do it if you don't have somebody show you. Having the tech folks hook you up, show you how to use it, show you how to turn it off, which is the most important part of a portable mic, is to turn it off when it should be off. In my experience, the tech folks love to help you with that. They love to, they're your roadies. So you got to introduce yourself early as possible. You got to make sure sound check stuff is all good, because if you got 3,000 people that can't hear, it doesn't matter how good the answer is.
You're not sharing that story.
Yeah. That's true, because tech ops, they're human beings, and they have to go to the bathroom, and often they will turn their entire system off if it can't be attended to go to the restroom or whatever, and then when they come back, they turn everything on. They have to retest everything. So making sure that you get that 15 to 20 minutes before your panel starts is that sweet spot. Not only introducing yourself to the tech lead of the room, but finding out, you've done your research. Do I have the appropriate number of chairs on that stage behind that table? Do I have the appropriate name placards on the stage? Do I have any name placards on the stage? Right. How about water? Has the old water cups from the panel before been cleared? Do you have fresh water pitchers? And what I enjoy doing, because it just saves that bit of nervousness that you may have with a panelist or a guest, is them reaching for that pitcher to pour their first glass of water, and they're doing this. I set fresh full water glasses. That way they can get comfortable around that first glass that's there. And then I try to be that polite moderator that fills their glass for them, because some of them will down 3 or 4 glasses. I'm sure you've experienced that. So just setting the room, like it's super important. Before you've even met the guest, you've done your research, you're talking to your tech leads, you're setting the room to make sure everything is clean, that the debris is out of the way, and you're not you're not stepping on the toes of the panelists that were there before you, because sometimes they get a little bit of action time with their fans when their panel's ended and they've not quite moved off the stage yet. So you want to be respectful, but at the same time, you want to hustle and get things ready. That way you're fresh and ready to introduce yourself to when those guests come backstage.
And you also have to know what type, how you're going to do this. Because I've done panels where you go in the room, there's 3 microphones on the stage, so that's and there are 4 guests.
Oh no, what do?
You have to find out, okay, what's the status of my wireless mic?
Yeah.
I've had panelists, I had my 3 mics on the stage, I had 3 guests. Well, guess what? There's no place for me. I Oprah it. I take the wireless mic and I go out into the audience. And you have to know that. If you know who's going to be on your panel, if you've done your research, you know what you're going to need to do. And that's why it's very important to get there the 15 to 20 minutes early. It can be hard, but
Well, let's talk about now. So now you've gone over the tech. Your needs are good. The guest shows up. What's the first thing that you do when you see the guests come in?
Well, you introduce yourself, of course.
Well, no.
Hi.
I'm Phil Collins.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, hold on. Before that, take a deep breath
There we go. Right.
and go, I am not a fan for the next hour.
You're the
I'm
professional.
a professional providing a service, and the rest of the room gets to fan. This is not my time to fan.
True.
I can fan it later, right? Plenty of opportunities to go.
That is a super important note, because we're going to be dealing in this position with some really high caliber celebrities.
Sure.
It might be you meeting your own personal star. I know in my experience at this convention, I have literally met my heroes here before.
Yes.
And my job is to not panic and go for hi, famous person. No, you're there, like we talked about, to guide them through the situation.
You're not there for autographs.
Not there for autographs. You're there to do the job. And when they disappear and you're done for the day, whatever, have your moment. And if they're cool with you, we'll talk about that in a minute, what happens at the end of the panel. But just have your moment internally, breathe, take that deep breath, center it, and use that excitement to balance you out.
I can confirm that I did not ask Billie Piper to marry me.
Why not?
Well, because I did not want to be that fan.
That's fair.
As a gay man, I wanted to ask her to marry me and love me forever. She was my personal hero, and she was someone that I was so excited to finally meet, and I got a chance to moderate her panel, and it was so amazing. But like you're right, because I'm always like, I'm cool. I can meet anybody. Whatever. It's fine. It's cool. Then I met her and I was just like,
There's always
how you
somebody.
doing? Yeah, she was
always
fine.
someone.
Yeah.
For me, it was
Huge
the
fan.
Fraggles and Carol Spinney because I love puppets,
my
right?
gosh,
yeah.
so fun.
Yeah, so you're gonna have
That's true.
your heroes in
No
our
matter
business.
how strong you think you are, you will meet
break.
your hero. You will break. Yeah.
You will break in the best way possible.
Yes.
So
In the most professional way.
mitigated.
I mean, they're impressed by that kind of not cold, but that cool demeanor.
Yeah,
sure.
Where you're like, of course you're one of the doctors. I can still be a professional for the next hour. I'm shaking, you're shaking inside, going,
Take it with you.
yeah, right, exactly. Is there room in your suitcase?
Yeah.
But I think that they know that there's lots of fans in the room, but being someone who is able to be appreciative of who they are, but respectful of who they are, that's a very important job that we're doing for those folks.
It builds that trust.
Exactly.
Yeah, they need you to be one of them at that moment. They need you to be the professional, like they're the professional, and that you're both going to engage together to an audience of fans.
So I got a question for you guys. How short is the introduction to the talent? How do you feel about that?
I have a couple of guests that I've moderated for a couple of times, so they know me, and we'll have a quick,
powwow.
hey, how you doing? But in generally speaking, it's just hi, my name's Phil Collins. I'm going to be moderating the panel, and just before we get started, is there anything that you really don't want to talk about today?
That's the important.
exactly it.
Don't ask them what they do want to talk about because they're there on behalf of a show or movie. The obvious what they want to talk about is there. Find out the barriers, the things that make them uncomfortable. We live in an age of social media and news cycles burn fast and hot.
Like a lot of guests don't like to talk about their family.
Yes.
And
Keep that stuff.
And their family may have been in the news. Their family may have been up on social media, because you'll find this out when you do your research. And they don't want to talk about their family.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to know that, so that if someone starts talking about their family, you can, okay, that's interesting, but what about? And
Guide it back around.
and pivot back to the topic of the panel.
Yeah. And I like that what Phil was saying was, this is my name, and this is what I'm doing for you, and then that's it, right into the first question of the job. There is no interview, there is no, here's my street creds, or here's why I'm cool. That's a conversation that you have with the people that run DragonCon. You don't have that conversation with the talent. Mostly they don't care, and that's fine. They're not supposed to care. I don't need them
Well,
to.
everyone's always running late and in a hurry to hurry up and wait. So you don't even have the luxury of being able to have that
Exactly.
relaxed conversation ahead of time. So it's great to get your name out, introduce yourself, shake hands, and look at whatever posse they have brought with them to kind of eyeball. They always got a posse. And it's always great to know that that is their posse and they're not someone that's not supposed to be back there.
Right.
So that's super important to kind of scope out from like a security standpoint.
You know
to make
their
sure.
face, but you might not know everyone in their
Correct,
posse's face.
absolutely.
And that is, that is.
So
a
that's
huge
part of my
thing.
introduction too, is just being like, oh, I see you've brought these lovely people, or this small child or dog. That's my favorite when guests bring their dogs. But you just do right. But so you make the opportunity to kind of get like a brief glance through of like, okay, this person brought 5 warm bodies and acknowledged all 5 of those people. It's not important for me to know who they are, but that it doesn't suddenly become 6 bodies or 7, and then we've got a problem with how many extra people are back there. So yeah, I think that's certainly part of that introduction phase is scoping your environment.
Being aware of the conversation points, being aware of the people that are with them, and being aware of their immediate comfort, because you can still introduce yourselves, and they still might be on edge. There's not a whole lot you can really do at that point, especially if the show's got to go on, the panel's got to get out there. So we're going to get on stage now, and we're going to be like, all right, well, ask them, if you're not running behind, be like, do you need a couple minutes? That's fine. Get on stage. Speak your speech, and we'll talk about that speech in a moment to kind of warm up the audience. Sure. But then bring them out with the warmth and the vibrance. Get the crowd excited, get them excited, because that will also kind of ease them into that as well. Their comfort is very important, because if they're uncomfortable, the audience, our fans, are also uncomfortable.
And know this: it's DragonCon. They're likely going to be, unless this is the first panel of the day, they are likely going to be late. It might not be a long time, but it's very likely that whomever you have on your panel, you have a 4-person panel, you're going to get 3 people showing up. Yeah. You have to be cognizant of the time that you have. You have an hour for the panel, so you can't hold it forever. But if you have a 3-person panel, and 2 people show up, and 1 person, give them a couple of minutes and be prepared to get out in front. In the front of the house, and make sure that everybody knows we're going to start in a few minutes. We're had some logistical issues, and stretch.
It happens. I had a guest, my first panel of the con last year. I had a guest who was a very recent mother, and her job was there, and she was nursing, which is awesome, great. But that happened right as we were supposed to start the panel. Well, we have to hold. We're not going to be like, hey, put your baby away, do your thing. And that's totally fine. But because of that, we were about 10 minutes late.
Sure.
And so the people outside, the fans, the tech were like, what's going on? I'm like, I will tell the tech what's going on. I'm like, this is what's going on. Let's keep the fans at bay. We'll maybe go out and say that message and be like, hey, logistical thing has happened. Give us 5 minutes and we'll get with you. It's important to keep the audience engaged, too.
I've done that and started to sing along.
Oh, wow.
It's it's what I do.
That's nice.
It's what I do.
Yeah, and that might not be what you do, but that's definitely your style.
I mean, again, it's all the whole point of everything that we do at DragonCon is to keep butts in seats for hours at a time, and you don't want the people who you've gotten into this room sitting down and ready to go, getting up and leaving.
Yeah. That's fair. No, that's
And one of the important things to know is that one of the reasons why that you, as a new moderator, have been asked to moderate is because there's something in you that you can bring to the DragonCon brand, to our audiences, to the fans, to our guests. So whatever angle works for you is yours. Own it. Always be confident. For me, I always warm up my audience at every panel that I moderate because I know they're going to all be late. And there is nothing worse than sitting in a panel room and the panel's about to start and no one's on the stage, no one has talked to you, no one has given you any direction as to what's going on, where you start doubting yourself and you're like, am I in the right room? This doesn't seem right. So I always warm up my audience and I turn my expressive personality to a 12
it's
for
usually at an
a
11.
panel. Right. I keep it at 11 most days. So I think it's important to jazz them up. And I'm always like, welcome to DragonCon 2018, whatever year that you're watching this, and ask them, who is our first timer? And everybody raises their hands. And then you start with, well, we've been here for 30-something years. Who's been here every year? And there's that one old person in the background that's like, me. And you're like, yay, let's give it up for the person that's been
I'll
here.
take that personally. I'll take it personally.
And honestly, I do that because I've had the pleasure of being with DragonCon since it started, and I love.
Oh my gosh, Methuselah! Thank you for joining us.
Yes, and I love. So who's the first DragonCon? Noob. You
Took you long enough.
Just like you have to get the guests engaged and ready to go.
Get them engaged.
The audience has to be ready to go as well.
Especially if it is a Q&A panel. And most of our panels are Q&A panels.
That's true, but it's important to know that if there are any other notes, like sometimes we've worked with guests where the studio that they were coming from had to have a transcribed list of the questions that were asked. So I had someone off stage type up all the questions, like as I was asking them or as the fans were asking them in the audience. Sometimes you have to moderate it and do all of the interviewing, but you will know that ahead of time. So nobody will ever blindside you like 5 minutes before you walk on the stage. Before you walk over there, by the way, you have to ask all the questions. No, but like you'll know. So, but knowing the style is certainly part of the preparation of a panel, is making sure that, is this a fan Q&A? Is this a moderator-controlled panel?
And you're going to see both. Here's the questions off to the side here.
Your 50 questions.
Yeah, and for me personally, as someone who has a background in interviewing, we talk about the styles. We talk about, we typically don't interview with a guest. That is kind of my style personally.
Sure.
I'll sit down there and I'll have a 5-minute conversation with whomever our guests are on the panel. And during that time, that's when before I start the question, I'll be like, hey, everyone, if you have questions, now's the time to go ahead and start lining up. And when I'm having the conversation, getting them the guests warmed up on stage in this environment, the audience is kind of getting used to it. It kind of keeps all of that chaos kind of contained from my experience.
It's hard to be that icebreaker. That one fan that asks the first question is usually the most is nervous or intimidated because they're breaking and they're setting the tone for the rest of the hour. So sometimes one of my warm-ups is to ask whoever's standing behind the mic, what will your question be? You're going to be the first question. What's it going to be? And then they'll ask in the microphone. I'll be like, okay, we're all going to pretend and go ooh and ah whenever you ask that question, like we've never heard it before. And then it kills, and then the poor guest is just like, why is everyone laughing? And I'll be like, oh, we did a warm-up question first. And so it's just kind of a lighthearted icebreaker that I use depending on the tone, the type of panel that we're going to have. So you have to come up with your own ways to icebreak. Talking conversationally certainly works for those first couple of minutes, but it's really important to make sure that the fan experience
it's important.
is what it is. is because the more questions they can get asked, the more that one-on-one, that guest answered their personal question that they've been waiting 7 years to be able to ask. So that's more happy faces leaving the panel because they were spoken to directly by the guest.
I love it when a guest to share. I have my personal experiences, how I relate with it. And I hope that you watching this will have your own personal experience to relate with it as well. The very last panel I moderated last year, it was a panel originally of 3 guests. It's a Monday panel. 2 of them didn't show. And that happens. That happens. This is the way it happens. It happens a lot. And so when that guest showed up, and I was lucky that I had already interviewed that guest in a one-on-one environment on Friday when I do bad interviews. So we immediately had a rapport, and I was like, "Hey, so by the way, you're the only one." And he's just like, "Okay." I'm like, "Do you need to wait 5 minutes?" I'm thinking we have an hour. We can kill a little time if you're worried. He's just like centered himself. He's like, "No, go. That's fine." So we go on stage. I tell the audience, by the way, I'm sorry. We are now short 2 guests, but we're going to make this one guest, this panel, be an incredible experience. As expected, people got up and leave because they were there for that one specific guest, all right? That happens. But we found ways to keep them in their seats. So when the celebrity introduced the celebrity, he's sitting down on the stage next to me, where you are. And it was beautiful because I'd ask him the opening question. Tony, what do you think of so-and-so? He would look at me and go, "That's a really fantastic question," and then immediately stare at the audience for the entirety of explanation. He understood his role, the audience, and it was fantastic to get that from a celebrity.
Oh, yeah.
Not every celebrity, though, is going to be that easy to manage. No. So what do you do?
All guests are created equal.
Yeah. So what happens when it goes off the rails, as we like to say?
Oh.
Yeah. Well, okay, so so one of the things that is not part of the traditional public speaking classroom is learning how to politely interrupt somebody when you really need to interrupt them. This is a tough one because you've got somebody who is much more famous and important to the con than you are for that hour, and they just are going and going and going. There is no magic bullet for how to get a guest to get the hint that they've told 3 different stories and there are 8 people behind the microphone and you're running out of time. So it is a judgment call. The best thing to do, and actually I think you did it to Phil just about 15 minutes ago, is to go, yes, now, yes, but, yes, and. What you're doing is you're inserting agreement with them. You're like, oh yeah, that's great. Tell you what, can we, go to the next question? Sometimes it's that simple. For some people, you kind of have to manipulate them onto a different part of the chessboard, if you will. But it is something that it's part of the job description, if you will, because you have one person who asks a good question does not get 45 minutes for the answer, even if the guest wants 45 minutes for the answer. That's not the way DragonCon works. Is you've got dozens of people who have got decent questions, and they each need to have a turn. So it's a balancing act. Got to let the fans' question get answered, but you've got to let other people have a chance.
And it sometimes feels like the longer they've been in show business, the harder it is to get them off the mic.
Oh yeah.
Well, sometimes you're just thrown. Probably the most shocking thing that has ever happened to me was a panel with only one guest, so I couldn't even duck and cover behind other guests to deflect. The guest was late. I've soft-shoed the audience. The guest arrives and opens with, because it was a panel that didn't really lend, it was the room space, didn't really lend to an off-the-stage introduction. This person kind of jumped on the stage because they were so late, I'd already begun warming up. So as soon as I got down, I just kind of stood up really quickly and pulled out the chair and allowed the guest to sit down, and the guest was just like, "So I'm a rape survivor." First words out of their mouth.
Huh.
Okay.
So I was like, that is so terrible. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you went through that. I'm so glad that you're here. Aren't we glad that this person is here at DragonCon with us? And then we were able to change and shift the tone, but this person was hawking their book, and it was their revelation of what they had went through with their previous marriage.
With the context, it makes sense, but...
And I was like, that is not what this... That was not the topic of the panel.
No.
It was this person's previous body of work in the sci-fi genre in film. So I'm like, what? So I was just like, did I miss the memo?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, those things do happen, and you have to be prepared to be like, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. However, aren't we glad that you're here today
It's
amongst
positive
all of these
beat.
beautiful people? And you just do what you can, because you never know when something's going to happen.
I've also done and witnessed a couple of panels where the guests didn't get along.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
Yes, that's my favorite.
And that's why it's important when you moderate to do a little research.
You're moving those placards around that table.
They don't sit next to each other. Yeah.
I happen to be of a larger stature. So
petite size too.
So I could sit. I've done this. I sat between two guests who were not exactly on first name basis, and it was really funny because one of the guests kept trying to talk over the other one, and as moderator, I kept saying, "Well, now really," and you have to be able to do that pivot and make sure that everybody on the panel
gets a turn.
Gets a turn, because part of the audience. At least part of the audience is there to see that other person.
Yeah.
You never know when it's going to happen. I actually was at a panel one time where 6 guests ganged up on a 7th guest, and this guest was not happy about it, and they left.
In the middle of the
In the middle of the panel, yeah.
Yes.
And how did you handle that?
Oh, I was in the audience. I laughed uproariously.
Oh, okay. All right. This one. I thought that was a learning opportunity.
I was like, and what did you do next? You
I felt bad. I was the moderator at the time. I think he handled it really well.
Oh, he did. Okay.
The person was obviously getting more and more upset because every time a question got asked, it was brought back to the 7th guest, and she was made to feel bad. And they were kind of joking at first, but they didn't. The 7th guest didn't take it well, and eventually 2 of the other guests got off stage and joined her, and they brought her back on stage.
Yeah.
So it was good, but the person who was moderating realized where it was going, and he quickly brought it back to a subject that had nothing to do with that 7th guest, while they were attending to her off stage.
That's good. So. Issues with the fans or something I want to talk about. I was witness to something years ago. One of my first cons. It's my 18 years of doing this convention, and I remember witnessing a panel. Thank you. It took me so long to get here. A panel, and this person was very famous at the time. This person still is very famous, but they were really at the height of a particular TV show's popularity. They were there with their band that year. It was a huge deal. Panels by themselves, and an audience member goes, "Hey, will you take off your shirt?"
Oh.
And without missing a beat, the actor was like, "Sure, if you take off yours." So what happened then was this audience member, she did get on stage. She did take off her shirt, and as agreed upon, the celebrity took their shirt off. Now, this was many, many, many years ago. Obviously, that is something we steer clear from now. We would not ever be in that situation. But how would you imagine handling that situation if that happened today?
And go. If there is a question that is asked from the audience that is entirely inappropriate, because I've done my research, I know the environment that I've put myself in, so it's not an in-joke because of what the celebrity has done. So some things are a little like off color that fit with who the guest is. Something like that, I immediately put my hand over their microphone and go, "Don't even answer that. Don't even respond. Just don't." Be like, "I'm so sorry. We're not going to do that today. Did you have a different question?" And I smile through the whole thing. And if they're even more difficult, I just look to tech and be like, "Ooh, I think they should have a better day elsewhere." And then I have never had that kind of problem, but I feel fully confident in the security that we have at DragonCon. We are fully aware of, because we've checked in with our tech leads and who all of our security, like everybody that is there that's important to help protect you and the guest on the stage, they will remove that. I have never felt unsafe or unclear that if somebody was unruly or disrespectful, that they would not be removed from the room and to never be seen, and I will never have to deal with that problem. However, I did have a situation with a volunteer that was inappropriate, and that volunteer was addressed and dealt with. We dealt with the whole panel professionally. It was brought to my attention afterwards because I thought something shifty was going on in the middle of this panel. Then it was actually brought to my attention exactly what had occurred, and so then I reported it to the right people, and then that person was taken care of. But that's the closest to an issue that I've ever dealt with was someone that was being inappropriate. And I don't want to say what department that it was in, because then that would narrow the focus of who we're talking about. But it was a volunteer that was very inappropriate, and it was taken care of. It made the guest uncomfortable, and when the guest is uncomfortable, I get upset. Because our job is to make sure the guest has the best experience of their life, so that they go back to whatever famous whatever they come from and tell all of their co-stars what a wonderful DragonCon experience they had, so that they will come. Not that we don't want that guest to come back, but we want them to spread the joy that is DragonCon to all that they know.
So that when they go back to that one apartment building in Vancouver where all the actors live, is that what you're talking?
Yes, I have friends that live in that apartment
building. One apartment building.
Share one space in Vancouver.
So I want to point out a couple of details of that. First of all, absolutely, you got to rely on your support people.
Right.
You're the moderator. You're not security. You're not tech ops. You're the moderator. You have to rely on them. You have to work with them. We've talked about that before. But also, I noticed that you didn't say you do not get a question now. You said, why don't you take a moment and come up with a different question?
Correct.
Not criticizing and not punishing them, but being very clear, that ain't going to happen.
Right.
We're going to do something different, and I'm now going to give you a chance to try a second time. But there's a point where you have hundreds or thousands of other people in the room going, not having any fun anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, this took a turn.
Surprisingly, some people don't know how to respect boundaries. It's shocking. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what you're talking about.
How you doing?
How you doing?
Oh, sorry.
I feel uncomfortable.
Is this panel after 10 p.m.? Because this is inappropriate.
That's actually an important thing to note as well.
Nice segue.
Because that's
anytime.
where I was going to go next. In fact, was we typically, like I said, avoid the more adult commentary. 10 p.m. is our cutoff time. I know I experienced last year. I'm sure this panel is one of the reasons that we have this note this year is family-friendly conversation.
Correct.
During the day. And it was a case where the guests just went off on their own and did a thing, and the audience was laughing and whatever. It's like, okay, whatever. Let's just grin and bear and through this. But it is a very clear note now that's like, if it is before 10 p.m., keep the conversation family friendly. Keep it above the table.
There's some guests who forget that there may be people who don't want to hear that type of language, and they will use a language, and you can kind of make. I've made a joke out of it.
You can always, if they use language, you can make a joke about it.
Someone dropped an F-bomb, and someone dropped an F-bomb, and I went. I made sure we don't use that kind of language here in the South. And they were cool with it. It's like, oh, I didn't realize. And then I reminded and I pointed to them in front of it, the little placard.
The little sign.
All the placards tabbed on the back, know who your audience is, smile, you're on DragonCon TV.
The first year we put those placards out, one of our guests who was here from a show that was known for not holding back their language, they're like, DragonCon TV. What the F is DragonCon TV? Just like right there, we're like, well, we've got that on camera. And that was a learning experience. So keep it going. But still keep it family friendly. Now after 10 p.m.,
and it's like,
so be it. But we probably won't be in that position as much.
And it's also like dealing with like a 3-year-old. You don't call a 3-year-old drops an F-bomb. You keep it.
Don't say that again.
Keep it going. Keep it moving on. Just kind of don't admonish the guests, but just let them know, hey, there might be kids present.
Yeah,
it happens to me every year. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, please tell me that you turned that guest talking about the placard into a bumper. Please tell me.
We joked about it on DragonCon TV for many years. I will say that has been our
So one of the ways that I handle like the inappropriate questions or dropping the F-bomb or something like that, a couple of things that have become inside jokes at the smaller conventions where I work. One is I will say that's a different panel. Right, and sometimes I'm able to lead into that's an after-hours panel, or that's a panel we'll do on Tuesday, or whatever. But there's a point where the audience, they've heard me do this, and I'll just go different panel, and the whole room knows that that's my way of going. We'll do that later. The other thing is, and this one takes a little bit of practice, but it's worth it for the laugh, which is the opinions of blank do not reflect the opinions of DragonCon or its subsidiaries. It's worth a little practice to have that, because it gets a laugh, it diffuses the tension, and it's not a punishment for being naughty. It's a way to diffuse and to deflect.
And most of the guests we have, if they accidentally drop an F-bomb, they realize it immediately and oops, I'm sorry. But then you had a guest who don't accidentally drop the F-bomb. That's just the way they talk. And hopefully they were vetted. Hopefully, we'll know that for next year.
Yeah.
Well, what is important to know is that you address it to the guests. You've pointed out to them in whatever humorous or sly way. You've made it very clear you have protected yourself because you're the one that's being judged as the moderator afterwards. Like, did you keep that guest in line from being that aggressive with foul language or suggestive themes? that aren't appropriate for a 1 p.m. panel on a Saturday because there are children in the audience.
Because all these people are grown.
Yes.
Right. But if the guest continues to drop F-bombs or say suggestive sexuality things, you just have to steer the question away and hope that the audience is going to throw different questions out that they're not going to go with. But you've done your job.
Yeah.
If that guest is that obscene, they won't be invited back, and that's not your job.
You're the moderator, not the police.
Correct.
Yeah.
You are not the police or the security of that.
Right.
You've done your job. You've covered your CYA.
And if it's appropriate, there are senior directors.
I love those after 10 p.m. panels. They're
Oh
my
yeah,
favorite.
but if it's appropriate and you have a guest that's constantly dropping it, trust me, the senior management of the con knows, and they are one or more of them is likely in attendance.
Yes.
Right.
And certain senior directors will shut it down. I have no doubt. They've not done it, but I have no doubt in my mind
Right. Yeah.
that certain senior directors will just shut it down. And
I don't even worry about that because these people are professionals and they're trying to keep their
you
fans.
have to be professional.
And you just be
Yes.
professional through the whole thing. That's the test. Can you keep it together when someone is falling apart around you? And you just have to. It's an hour.
Yeah.
You can do anything for an hour.
It is 55 minutes.
Yeah.
I heard it was 5.
It's. I think.
Different panel.
I think Einstein proved that the panel is longer, the weirder and harder the guest is to
Yeah,
deal with.
yes.
It's the time dilation factor.
That's so
It does. I've had 5-hour panels. I really.
So, moderator feedback as well, because we can go in and be prepared as we want. You just had a moderator feedback. One of the great ways that we get moderator feedback from the
fans.
the
in the audience.
fans, brain dead. There, see, this is going to happen. It's live-ish. It's from our app, our DragonCon app, which is something we've done now for 3 or 4 years. It is
And there's a moderator feedback section.
everything in it. And I, as a moderator, I have asked if there's any bad stuff in there because I'm curious. I need feedback. You as a moderator will have that option as well. And it is a great place to get that information.
It is.
What did I do wrong? What did I do right? What does the audience think of me? Now, at the same time, one thing that our current cook-on chair, Rachel Reeves, told me in that conversation, she's just like, anything you see here, don't take it to heart. You know, don't. You know, it's
not
like,
obsess over
do
it.
not obsess over it. You know, sometimes you'll get that negative thing, and that's okay. You're in a public position. You're not there to make everyone happy, even though that is your goal. You want to make as many people have as much joy at DragonCon as they can.
It's a bell curve.
But exactly, it's a different grading system for each individual person. Don't beat yourself up over a bad panel experience.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
My favorite feedback that I like to talk about is that I was given very extreme ratings from one end to the other on one particular panel. And the person that did not like me went on to talk about that I was the worst moderator that they had ever experienced, that I just did not need to be doing it, that I was too flamboyant.
I'm sorry.
The other one told me that I was like a unicorn butterfly personified in human form and said that they would have given me more stars if it was possible. Clearly, there was someone that did not like my style of moderating in the room, and then there was someone in there that I gave life to. So you take it with a grain of salt. I took that very middle section where they said, for the Masquerade. I was one of the co-hosts of the Masquerade for the 2017 show, and someone had said that they felt that I overused the word amazing because it was a costume contest, and it is a word that I enjoy using. So in being positive, I imagine I was telling everything that crossed the stage how amazing it looked. So I took that and was like, ooh, check your adjectives. So that is productive feedback that will help you to steer yourself. Not you're horrible or you're the most amazing thing ever.
Right.
You're not either of those things. You're just a human being. So look at that middle stuff that's actually constructive criticism.
It's a very good rule. Don't read the 1-star reviews. Don't read the 5-star reviews because neither of those will help. It's the 3-star reviews that really have the good information.
Correct.
in them.
You're absolutely
I
right.
agree
And
with
that's
that.
why in the Olympics they drop the highest and the lowest score.
I can imagine off to the tech ops booth having a sign that says not 5 minutes, but 4.0.
Yeah.
So
The Russian judge doesn't like unicorn butterflies. and it
it's a
shows.
shame.
That's
So it's
another- you kind of just segued into that.
that's what I do. That's where I'm going. It's the tech ops
That
side.
is another important thing you have to remember.
It's your timing.
Your timing. The bigger the room, the more important it is for you to know that because your tech person should hold up a sign at 10 minutes and at 5 minutes. 10 minutes should be your last question that you take from the audience. At 5 minutes, that's when you want to start wrapping the guest up. Because unless
How
you're
do you wrap the guest, Phil?
Go on.
how do you wrap the guest up? You have to use your skills, and you may have to interrupt the guest.
Okay.
And you have to remind them, hey, Tony, this has been a great deal of fun. I'm sure everybody enjoyed your conversation and the questions that you answered. And we want to thank you very much for being with us here at DragonCon. But alas, our time is up.
Heartbroken.
I know. But can you tell us what you're going to be doing next?
That's what I wanted to hear. Every moderator should allow in the wrap up the opportunity for the guests to tell those thousands of fans in the audience where they're going to be next. Come see me at the Walk of Fame where I'll be signing for a few more hours. So if you didn't get that question answered, come see me downstairs in the Marriott.
That's awesome.
For selfies and autographs and
all the
photo
fun
ops
stuff.
and all the fun.
But it's very important that you end your panel when it's supposed to end because the room, depending on the size of the room has to be cleared. A 3,000 person room does not clear in 20 seconds.
No, because there's several thousand people outside waiting to come in after those thousands of people leave. Right. So it's important to stay on schedule.
So you have to make sure your room your panel ends so that they can clear the room.
Yeah,
that is the most important.
Even if a panel starts late, I had panels last year. We started 15 minutes late. Sorry,
Still ends on time.
And I ended on time. And afterwards, I had tech tell me, they're like, "Oh, you could have ran," because it was like one of the last panels of the day. I'm like, "You could have ran 5 more minutes." I'm like, "No, we ended on the clock because we got to keep this show going."
And I don't care if it's a famous cooking guy or a famous starship captain. 60 minutes is 60 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
So to that point, though, we did kind of gloss over this. I want to kind of circle back around before we go. What do you say to the audience? We're going to kind of go around the table.
Okay.
You introducing yourself. What do you say to the audience about, like, don't ask these questions or keep your questions limited? What is an important tip for you to address the audience before you start to kind of help steer the ship for the entirety?
I remind everybody that there are a lot of people who want to ask a lot of questions. So let's try to keep our questions quick, brief, to the point, and on topic.
All right.
Depending on the room that we've been assigned, because the size of the room kind of dictates what type of microphone runner quantity that you have. In the larger format rooms, you usually have 2. And then as the moderator, I think it's extremely important to make sure that you're paying attention to those with special needs that are sitting in the front row that don't have the ability to get up and go to the back. So I sometimes ask those questions, and I will make that announcement ahead of time, usually while waiting for the guests. I've done the warm-up and set everything up. I'm like, hey, guys, we've got 2 mic people. I try to get them to raise their hands so that they're identified. If you have a question, line up behind them. If there is not a way for you to get up and go behind them, please raise your hand here in the front, and I'll be happy to call. And so I try to rotate it out, especially in those larger format ballrooms, because those people that don't have the capacity, the ability to get up and walk, they have questions too, and it's important that they feel involved. So that to me is probably the most important thing to set up for your guests, is to make sure that everybody in the room, no matter how close or far, the people that need that extra little bit of time, they're closest to you, so you can be that facilitator to get their questions asked.
Fantastic.
And you've just made a couple of permanent fans.
True.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if anybody who has physical problems getting to the microphone, they may never have gotten asked a question.
Correct.
No matter how many times they've come to DragonCon. I'm going to let this one pass because I think Phil and Tony covered it for me.
Fantastic. One thing I've learned is I typically, there's a lot of questions, and I'll be very clear, like, try to avoid multi-part questions. That it doesn't stop it, but you always get that one person that asks a 17-part question answered in an essay form, 5,000 words or less kind of mentality. And that's okay. They have that right to be excited about their fandom. They have that right to ask that question. But to your point, keep it moving.
Brief and to the point.
Brief and to the point. And to your point, include everyone. Get everyone involved. Because we're all part of the DragonCon family between fandoms, guests, and celebrities. So you get one more point?
I did think of something.
Addition.
I did think of something I wanted to throw in. As the moderator, it is, I think, not just appropriate, but also your job to help the guest keep up with the fans. If you've got somebody who's asking kind of a question, it takes them a couple of streets to get to the post office, and if you can make that question translated down into something the guest can process, because helping the fan get the question answered is more important than waiting for them to get the grammar to come out correctly. So I think it's a tough skill sometimes, especially if you didn't catch what they were asking. But I think it takes about 30 seconds to make that question translate for the guest.
Sure.
And you also have to recognize, especially when a fan asks a question that the panelists may not be prepared for, you have to be able to recognize that that panelist may be trying not to answer, and you might want you have to know when to. Let's move on to something else.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So we've ended the panel, or we're about to end the panel. We've wrapped up. We've gone through start to finish. How do you say goodbye to your guests? How do you say goodbye to these people that you just spent an hour of your life with?
Kind of like your intro, you thank the panelist, and you thank the audience. You thank thank them for coming to the panel. I'm sure that I hope you all had a great time with this. But let's all give a big round of applause to our guest today.
Nice. Anything you want to add to that?
I always make sure that after I say my pleasantries and giving up for the applause, that I stand up and try to be the first to stand up, and I assist the ladies out of their chairs and wait for the men. But whenever because they tend to walk off the stage together as a group, or they fly off the stage.
Yes.
My goal is to angle myself between the guests and the audience. That way, no one can rush the stage and be able to confidently be able to get their attention to try to begin talking to them before they can get off the stage. So that to me is super important, is to just be polite, but at the same time insert myself in such a way that the fans know that we are done here and they're going to get off the stage, and then the guest is just like, yes, thank you.
And depending on the room, depending on the room, that can be easier or hard.
Yeah,
a lot of our main panel rooms have a distinct backstage area that the attendees can't get to.
Right.
Some of the backstage areas just a curtained off area to the side. Know your room.
Know your room.
Know your
Absolutely.
exits.
But that to me is just super important when wrapping up your panels. It's making sure that your guest is safely able to get off the stage and then feel confident that because sometimes they have to go to the bathroom, or they're late to go to their photo op, or they're next, or they're hungry and they just want to go.
Yeah,
That's right.
the exits are here.
Right.
But also, when you're saying goodbye, I would definitely acknowledge all of your panelists.
By name.
Yes, by
By
name.
name, certainly
Yes,
important.
very important. But also, one thing I want to emphasize is that we're back to don't take it personally. If they look at you as just somebody who was running the show and that's it, and you're just a cardboard cutout, don't take it personally.
No.
It happens. It's not a big deal. If they want to be buddies, they will volunteer. You don't ask for that. You don't approach them in that way. It is, thank you so much, Crispy, for being on the panel. And I every once in a while I might say, everything okay? Are we good? Just to let them know that my job is not over as soon as I've shaken their hand and say goodbye. I'm like, if you need me for another couple of minutes to help you get out of here. There are things you can do on their way out.
That's a real important one, because some of these guests, they're supposed to have someone from guest transportation move them on to the next. Sometimes they're not there yet.
It happens.
And I've asked, do you need me to help you get to your next panel? Do you have someplace? Do you have someplace you need to be next? How can I help you?
Right.
I'm at your service.
Yeah. I think that's extending your coverage beyond the panel. I think is a really fantastic point on that.
I like to reinforce to them how wonderful the experience was.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, that was a really great panel. Thank you so much for that. It was really awesome. I think the crowd really loved it. You have blown up their ego even more, because no matter who you are, you're going to walk off that stage and go, ooh, did I suck? Was that good?
Every
Did I
time.
think it was good, or was it?
And I think it's even more important to do that when they did not have a good panel.
Amazing.
Oh, I know. Wasn't that good? No, it was fine. It was great.
Trust me, I've seen worse.
Yeah.
I've used
Throw
that-
someone else under the bus then.
I have
All right.
used that I've used that several times. I had a guest who basically sat there for 42 minutes while the other person on the panel just talked over him. And I've seen worse.
Wow. We'll have to get that story later then. So, but that's kind of, I think, the main points, though, to go over panel moderation 101, 102. Are there any last notes that you guys want to add? I'll go from my left to right this time. Any important final tips before we sign off?
So this comes from a public speaking background. One of the things that you've covered with about 8 of these items on the list is that you are the captain of the ship for that hour. It's your room.
What if there are other Starship captains on the panel with you?
You outrank them.
There it is.
That's the naval tradition is you are the Commodore for that hour, and they are the captains that work for you that time. But in all seriousness, it is your responsibility. It is your room. Going in and making sure everything is working, making sure everyone is comfortable, making sure the fans are engaged, that's owning the room. Know the backstage area so that you're not walking the guests up to a broom closet. They'll remember that. Yeah. Okay? That guy that gave me he put me in a broom closet. But also, it It is part of setting the tone inside yourself. The voice in your head is going, I'm in charge. Not, oh my God, I'm in charge, but yeah, I'm going to fix whatever happens because I can. Some crazy stuff is going to happen and will happen every year. So you can't go in and go, well, I'll whatever, we'll see what happens. No, it's your room. If it hits the fan, if somebody drops an F-bomb and there's an 8-year-old in the front row crying, that's your 8-year-old you got to deal with at that moment, or whatever it is. So it is important to emphasize that you have to not just take ownership, but take the power. Right? And after 50 minutes, you got to give it back. You got to hand it off to the next person, or you got to stop doing it and go, get out of the room. And kind of, you cannot take that with you out of the room, but when you're in that room, it's your room.
Nice. Tony, what would you like to add before we go?
I think it's important that when moderating any panel for DragonCon, that you eat a good-sized piece of humble pie before entering the space and leaving the space, because it is not about you at all. It is about the guests. It is about the fans' interactions with the guests. And if you in any way try to trump that guest and be more fabulous than them, even if you are, because sometimes you're stuck with that one person that just wants to talk about that Caesar salad they want to order from room service later, and that's the extent of their excitement, and your animation might be a little bit more outshining. You have to be that person that feeds the room the energy that they need to go through, but not be too big, because it's going to come back to bite you in the ass.
Lastly?
Be professional and have fun. None of us is getting paid to do this.
We're not?
No.
But seriously, none of us is getting paid to do this. None of us is getting paid to do this. We're doing this because we like doing it.
It's a lot.
If you're volunteering to be a moderator, you have an ego too. That's the most important thing I learned about moderating. Everybody up on that stage has an ego. You have to tamp yours down just enough to make the guest comfortable, the audience happy. It's kind of like being an official in a sporting event. No one ever remembers the officials' names until they make a huge mistake. You don't want them to remember your name as a moderator.
That's the best way to look at it. If they do remember your name for the good stuff, great. Don't let that be your focus.
Yeah, correct.
That was going to be my point as well. Is my biggest complaint, not at this convention, but too often I will see the moderator want to be a part of the act. I mentioned earlier my first panel with Brett Dalton. He made me part of the act. I didn't ask for that. I didn't guide that. That's just what happens.
That's just him.
And if that's what makes the guest comfortable, you got to be ready to roll with that, because it's about making everyone comfortable, from yourself to the guest to the audience to anyone watching this. We want everyone to have the joy that is DragonCon, and comfort and trust is the foundation of that. So keep all of that in mind as you go off into the world and moderate panels here at DragonCon. But you hit us up for questions if you see us, and I hope that you have a fantastic DragonCon. So on behalf of our fantastic panel here, thank you guys so much for watching this, and we'll see you around the convention.
Bye y'all.